Hello, I'm Robert, and this time it's about people who are scared that Russia's going to blow up the Nova Kahkhova canal dam, so above Kherson. So the update is Putin thinks it's unlikely. Now just try a little bit of noticing how many times Russia has bluffed and said these daft, scary things. Now I know they are attacking the Ukrainian infrastructure, and the Ukrainians getting very good air defences for that. So that's really been quite bad news for Russia, because the air defences will also help Ukraine in the war. So Russia has really, they haven't achieved anything really. They're not going to stop. The Ukraine is not going to surrender because of just Russia hitting the power stations. And they're getting better defences, they'll be getting generators and things, but they are mainly focusing on defending and repairing the power stations. So now this idea they're going to blow up this dam, blowing up the dam, there's no point in a false flag. Putin has plenty of false flags, plenty of reasons, of excuses for a tactical nuke. If he wanted one, he doesn't want one. It's clear that Putin doesn't want to do that. He just doesn't want to go there. And it's no surprise. So just go down and look at this. The two updates are that first of all, Russians are lowering the level of the water behind the dam, probably to lessen the impact. And they also only have explosives enough to damage the top part of the dam with a limited flow of water, so it's not going to be a huge flood like people thought before. It's definitely not, the Ukrainians would not do this, no way. They've been using HIMARS to precisely hit the road and carefully not target the dam. And they wouldn't be able to do much to a dam with HIMARS anyway. A dam is quite a strong thing. They're very careful to miss it. Now, the only reason Ukraine would do this is to prevent a rout, basically. So this should scroll down a bit and show why. You don't need to worry about the power plant. I haven't got many people scared about that now, since I explained that. It seems reasonably well explained in the debug. They've got plenty of cooling water because they only need low pressure water with hoses now, because it's cooled down quite a lot. So they could just get it from the Dnipro with long hoses if they wanted to. Now, this is one reason why Russia seems unlikely to do this. For as long as they keep the reservoir intact, there's at least a possibility in negotiations, or if they can manage to keep hold of the dam, of the canal, that they have water from the Crimean Canal. They don't need it this time of year. They need it for the dry season in summer, when some of their rivers dry up completely. And they do have plenty of drinking water even in the dry season, dries past the summer, because they have lots of rivers in Crimea actually. It's quite mountainous. There are mountains higher than the mountains in Scotland or in Wales. Really quite high mountains with lots of rivers flowing down from them. But they have an area called the Crimean Steppe, which is quite high and quite dry. There's one long river from Crimea that now goes via the canal to the steppe, so it has some irrigation. But they don't have nearly enough irrigation to grow the vast numbers of crop, because it's very dry. The steppe has rivers too, but the rivers on the Crimean Steppe only flow in the spring and during the snow melt. For a short time, the rivers in the steppe flow. And because of the Crimean Canal, the Ukrainians, when Crimea was part of Ukraine, and then originally the Soviet Union, it was a Soviet Union project, they used that to irrigate the Crimean Steppe, so they could grow things like fruit trees in orchards, even though the summer was very dry, using water from the Crimean Canal and from this river in Crimea, but supplemented by the river water from the Dnipro River. So they use quite a lot of water from the Dnieper River, which is a big river, in Crimea. And then since 2014, the Ukrainians have diverted that water so it can't be used for orchards in Crimea, and instead is used for similar projects in Ukraine. It's used for agriculture in Ukraine. So that's basically what's happened since then. And then when the Russians, one of their first objectives, in a few days, they got to the Crimean Canal on 26th, I think, within 2 days, and then they blew the dam, and then it took several months, because of lots of trees and things going in the canal, to get it actually flowing. But they didn't really need it until spring, until summer. And by the summer, and after the spring floods, they were getting water from the Crimean Canal. So they got water from the Crimean Canal all summer. And so presumably that was helping them with their orchards and things. And then, now they don't mind too much about it, they do mind about it for next summer. So that is one reason why they're not very likely to cause permanent damage to the canal. They might cause that to the reservoir. They might damage the top of it, reasoning that Ukraine is going to rebuild it, and then hopefully they're either going to win back the canal, or that they're going to be able to negotiate something or whatever. As long as the canal is still, as the reservoir, the dam is still there, there's some possibility that at some point Crimea might have access to the water from the Dnieper. Either they win it back with some negotiation. But if they damage the reservoir, so it would be a very big blow for the Crimeans if the reservoir was damaged, because they had great hopes for water in the summer from the Crimean Canal. In actuality, what's likely to happen now is that Russia is losing. Every battle it's lost. It's lost several big battles early on: the Battle of Kiev, the Battle of Snake Island, sinking of the Moskva. Then, in quick succession, they lost the Kharkiv Oblast, the Battle of Izium, then the Kharkiv Oblast, and the Battle of Lyman. And then simultaneously with losing that, they also lost the northern part of the Kherson Oblast. Since then, there's been a bit of a gap for 2-3 weeks now, and it's partly because of the mud, I think makes the fighting more difficult. But it seems likely that Ukraine are going to do at least one more major counteroffensive before the big mud season is well underway and before winter. And it's not certain they are. They might just be messing around with Russian ideas. But they are actually, they seem now to be doing progress in Donbass. Basically, anywhere they try and get Russia to draw its attention to Kherson at the moment, they're now making progress again in Luhansk and Donetsk. And nobody quite knows. They are causing lots of problems for Russia in Mariupol and Kherson, but that's not their focus at the moment. They seem now to be focusing in Donetsk as one of the things they're doing, just pushing back a little bit to prepare for the winter, maybe. It's not clear they're going to do a big advance in Donetsk. They've done a significant one that has undone a lot of work. There was a big push by the Russians to try and take Bakhmut, which is a very small city, only 70,000 or something, and nobody is really quite clear why the Russians are so keen on taking Bakhmut. It's not a very important city. It's not strategically important. It's not politically important. But Russia has been battering away at it with their best fighters. Even while they were losing Izium and losing Lyman, they were battering away, trying to take Bakhmut. And the Ukrainians stopped them. And then recently, they have, just in the last couple of days, the Ukrainians have managed to beat the Russians back 2-3 kilometers. All the work that they'd done for weeks has now been undone. And so that's one thing that the Ukrainians have just done recently. And they also are now making progress to Svatove, is another area. I think just a morale thing with Bakhmut. I'm not sure they're really doing anything except trying to mess around with the Russian morale and capture some of the Wagner fighters, which are some of their best fighters. And then eventually it's going to be useful for Donetsk. I don't know. We don't know. They're very. They always think 5 moves ahead of everyone. They're like grandmasters at chess. The military advisors I follow just don't know what they're going to do next because it's so clever. So they're pushing away at Svatove, and then so the Ukrainians, people are going to be learning from from their strategy for years to decades to come, because they're the only people to ever fought a war using these kinds of weapons against people like the Russians, with modern weapons ever, with the same capabilities as Ukraine has. And so NATO are learning from that, something they can never learn themselves, because they're not involved in any wars like that. And anyway, so if we look at Kherson, which way do I go? I've explained about the Crimean Canal. I think that's a picture of the dam flowing, and things looking a lot greener because the Crimean dam is flowing again, or was flowing last summer. So most likely Ukraine win back Crimea, because here there's a picture of Crimea. You can see how if they blow the dam, that affects the water supply all the way to there. The other way around, when the Ukrainians damaged the Kerch Bridge, that then affected the military supplies, not the civilian supplies, to Kherson and to Mariupol. And so that's why some of the people I follow wonder if maybe what they really plan to do is to go for Mariupol rather than Kherson. So here, yes, this is the effect. So what so they pushed back Kherson. The Ukrainians are way up here. They're nowhere near Kherson quite yet, though they're pushing back a bit at a time. But the Russians worry that the Ukrainians might. Let's see if I can find a better drawing. Here we are. That's a good drawing, a good map. So the Kherson is this side of the Dnipro River, and the Ukrainians are pushing hard against the Russians in Kherson, but they're not trying to. The Ukrainians aren't very keen on street-to-street fighting. They tend to be much more subtle, and they cut off the supply routes and just wait for the Russians to run out of ammunition. And so that's basically what they're probably doing in Kherson, and just messing with the Russians and waiting for them to run out of ammunition. And then when the time comes when they think the Russians have got almost no supplies of ammunition left, so Ukrainians will probably try pushing a little bit at Kherson, and then if the Russians still seem to have lots of ammunition, they'll say, well, not the time yet, we'll just wait a bit longer. And as a result, they find out where the munitions are, they hit it, they get local news and so on like that. So it's probably something like that that the Ukraine is doing at the moment. And the Russians, what they worry is that with the Battle of Kharkiv, that the Russians just ran away. The Ukrainians just surprised the Russians. It's very weakly held. The Russians just ran away, and it's basically a rout. So the Russians clearly are worrying that the same thing might happen in Kherson, that they just can't keep the discipline. It takes a lot of very dedicated soldiers who are prepared to die for their companions. Most of them will probably die, the ones that stay behind, if they secure the crossing so that their companions can all retreat. So you need very much an army that has got a very strong team spirit, where some of the very best fighters are prepared to stay behind, knowing that most of them will die, in order to make sure that they keep safe passage for the rest of the fighters to retreat. That's what they would need to do for a managed retreat of Kherson. And the Russians clearly don't think that they're going to be able to do that. They're a bit worried they won't be able to do that. Instead, they probably just get a rout. where the Russians run as fast as they can across the river, and just every man for themselves, as it were, or every truck for itself, just rushing across, and the ferries won't take very many at a time, so it'll be long queues waiting to cross on the ferries, and then everyone just trying to get on the ferries, and as soon as they get to the other side, just run away as fast as they can, drive away as fast as they can on the far side. Some might even swim across the river, some try to run across the bridge and things like that. And then, so in that situation, the Russians might damage the dam in order to get a big flow of water going down the Dnieper, and their aim would be to cause enough problems for the Ukrainians so the Ukrainians stop chasing them and instead help with evacuating the other Ukrainians from Kherson away from areas that are about to be flooded, and also hopefully widen the river, maybe not as much as 5 kilometers if it's only part of it, but just instead of 1 kilometer, maybe a couple of kilometers or something, so that it's harder for the Ukrainians to cross over. And so this would be a rather desperate move, especially if they did the 5 kilometers thing, which they're clearly not going to do now. Or if they did do that, it would be a very desperate move, because large areas of Kherson would be of the side they would want to keep, would also be damaged. And we'd only do this if they're planning to retreat a long way, probably nearly all the way back to Crimea, and then try and set up a defensive line there, and just give enough time for the Russians to run away fast enough while the Ukrainians run after them. So that would be the only reason really to do it. So this is not a situation where Russia is escalating. This is not an escalation. This is a defensive move, a desperate defensive move that an army would only do if it's in really terrible straits. And the only thing it can think to do is to damage much of their own territory in the hope to delay slightly, by a couple of weeks, the advance of the Ukrainians. So I think you can see from that it's something the Russians, it's basically the sort of thing the Russians are preparing to do, hoping that they never have to do it. That would be the way, if they do it at all, it would be something, they may well be saying, well, we're never going to do that, it just never makes sense. But if they do have this as a plan at all, it's a plan they would only have as a fallback that they hope they never need. So I hope that helps you understand. It would be a lot of work for the Ukrainians if they do that, but it's not something to be scared of. It's not going to affect any other country. It'll mainly affect the Russians and be very bad for the Russians, because they'd lose their prize for the Crimea, have no possibility of ever getting that. Not for, it would take probably 1, 2, 3 years or something. I don't know. It takes quite a long time to build a dam. So it would be quite a difficult situation if they did that. For Ukraine too, because they would have to deal with their, they would have to substitute for the hydroelectric from this big hydro dam, and so it would lose yet more of the electric power, but also the electric power for southern Ukraine. So it's not very good for Russia, because they hope to hold on to southern Ukraine. So it doesn't really make much sense. It's basically fixed electricity for this area sort of thing, quite a large area. So if they do that, and it's extremely unlikely they do, then this would just add to the massive cost of reconstructing the Ukraine after the war. And in July, one of the estimates was that it would cost $1.2 trillion to reconstruct Ukraine, far more than the national debt of either Russia's debt, national debt I think in tens of billions or something, not as big as 100 billion I don't think, and it's nothing like Ukraine, like the USA. It's a far smaller economy. The Russian economy is roughly equivalent to the economy of Italy, but it's quite a strong economy. So that's not kind of sneeze of it. It's not too bad, but it's far larger country than Italy, with a similar economy to Italy. And it would be very difficult for Russia to, so they've got quite a lot of foreign reserves, 300 billions. They've got 300 billion domestic reserves. And war reparations of 1.1 trillion would be quite a lot for Russia to find. And so the cost now would be much higher than 1.1 trillion if they really had to pay for all the damage they caused. Just the physical damage of rebuilding Ukraine, not compensation for the lives that they've ruined, just the rebuilding of Ukraine. 1.1 trillion in July, and look at all that happened since then. It's probably much more than that now. So anyway, Russia just couldn't afford, I don't think Russia could afford to pay for the war reparations if it was the full reparations of what it costs. The EU can afford to take on debts like that, and the EU is planning to mobilise some like lending, I think probably low interest loans, something like that, to help Ukraine to rebuild. But they would want to help. There's the call by Estonia and various others to use the 300 billion, so there's the frozen assets, the foreign assets of Russia, and that was about 300 billions that they had in foreign assets, and they have 300 billions in domestic assets connected with their banks, their foreign reserves. And so this is what Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, I think Poland is it, I'm not sure, I've got a list here. No, Slovakia, sorry. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania and Slovakia. Then those four countries, they are the ones that so far want the 300 billion national debt to be used to rebuild Ukraine. And the US is not very keen on that because they worry that a lot of countries have their national debt in dollars, and although not much of the national debt is actually held in the United States, a lot of it is held in dollars. So the United States worries that if this happens, it sets up a precedent, and other countries will not want to use dollars for their foreign reserves, which then impacts on the idea of the US dollar as a reserve currency. So that's the United States' main objections to this. However, as it becomes clearer and clearer, and I think especially the way Russia is admitting to the civil, it's just straightforward saying, we are deliberately targeting your civilian infrastructure. They're saying that on Russian TV. No, not hiding it at all. That's a very clear war crime. So if the United States was to say something like, okay, this is something that is admittable so long as the country is using very clear war crimes, and is involving very clear war crimes that require reparations, then something like that might be something where they would think, well, this wouldn't cause too much trouble with the reputation of the US dollar for foreign reserves. But whether or not, there's quite a lot of pressure on this, and there's some ideas about how legally you could do it in the United States, and it is possible to do it legally, so it's the various ways you could do it. So if this is something being discussed, it might happen, it probably is, with all the discussion, it might take years to actually happen, so it probably wouldn't be the very first thing that would happen, but it would be symbolically very important, and it would be kind of backup thing, like, okay, you're borrowing 700 billion tops. First of all, tens of millions, then eventually hundreds of billions from the EU. But you want to pay it back, and so if you had the idea that you're going to get 300 billions from the Russian foreign reserves, then that would be much easier to stomach the idea of borrowing large amounts from EU. You could borrow $300 billion from the EU, being pretty sure you can pay it back by just using the Russian foreign reserves. Ukraine, of course, want this to happen as well. So that's Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, Slovakia and Ukraine. They're all very keen on this idea. And gradually more may. And so the relevance here is that if Russia was to if Russia was to do anything that is kind of very obviously very big thing, an very obvious civilian war crime, then, and just my personal opinion really, but it seems to be very likely that this would then increase the pressure to use their foreign reserves for war reparations. Because it would help with this legal argument, the legal ideas, and the ideas about the civilian, about foreign currency, just very clearly delineate that this is not anything that an ordinary country needs to worry about, that this is going to happen to their foreign assets, so long as you don't do things like fire missiles at someone's power plants, then or bomb their reservoirs, then you don't need to worry about your foreign assets being seized and being used for war reparations. So I think there would be, the more that Russia continues to attack civilian infrastructure, the easier the argument comes of trying to persuade the United States that, okay, this is not a big deal, it's not going to impact on the credibility of the dollar as a reserve currency. So that's basically that. So anyway, that's all I wanted to talk about. Hope this helps you if you're scared of many things. Help you a little bit with with all these ideas about these things. It's not very likely that they really do this hydro dam. It's nothing to do with the World War, nothing to do with the nuclear war. It's not a false flag thing. It's just a desperate move thing they would do with lots of downsides, and they'd only do it if they were just an absolute rout, and it's the only way they could think to kind of slow down the Ukrainians. Maybe in that situation, if they were just so desperate, they might consider doing it. But Putin doesn't really think that they're going to do it. So that's basically that one.